Chapter 32. Sooner than we expected, Olav was up on crutches, shuffling around like a stiff board. It gave him the opportunity to get out in the fresh air. He was impressed with our little farm. He'd look out over our gently sloping fields and proclaim how easy it would be to make a living here, compared to the steep hills in Norway. Because of his excellent physical shape, he was soon able to make his way into Corey's shop. He was overwhelmed by the machinery that Corey had acquired from my father: the delta saws, lathe, router, drill press, and sander. But by the same token, he shook his head at the disarray. He began to straighten up the shop, happy to be occupied. One day he came in with Corey's fishing box, excited as a little kid, yeah. He set to work untangling line, cleaning, and polishing, all the while asking questions about our fishing experiences. I told him about our trips to the streams and the mountains, and about Corey fishing for bass from the rocks below our cabin at Oceanside, Oregon. I revealed a big family secret. Although the Gustafsson clan were not avid fishermen, they liked to think they were. After all, fishing was Norway's leading industry. At every family gathering, someone would say, "Someday we'll have to get a party together and go out on a charter boat." That had become so annoying that one day I had packed Eric into the car and driven to Depot Bay and took a charter boat. What a day it was. We had caught our limit of big, beautiful salmon. When the rest of the clan heard our story, charter fishing became a family hobby. Olav was amazed at the freedom Americans had to fish. He talked about wealthy Englishmen who came to Norway and bought fishing rights so that many of the rivers were out of bounds to the Norwegians. This gave me the opportunity to tell him about the fascinating life of the salmon, how the female lays its eggs in the spawning grounds and the male fertilizes them, how the small salmon goes out to sea and then 4 years later returns to the same river and repeats the process. I finished on a high note. Did you ever hear such an amazing thing? Yeah, Olav laughed. They in Norway are salmon having too. That was a surprise to me. I thought all they had in Norway was pickled herring. I knew that Olav was dying to go fishing, so one day I drove him and the kids to Camp Creek. I had never seen anyone so knowledgeable about fishing. He would direct me, "Put your hook down, der." I would do as he'd say, and sure enough, I would catch a fish. One day we all drove to our cabin at Oceanside, and Corey and Olav fished off the rocks. Olav thought that the cabin with its wonderful view of the ocean was spectacular, and wondered why we had never installed paneling. He said he would love to do it. Corey said, "Maybe someday." Olav's long hours cleaning the barn and the shop were making wonderful improvements. Corey began talking about paying him wages, but since he was on a visitor's visa, it could not be done legally. We shuddered at the thought of committing a blunder like the one that had plagued us for months and was still not settled. It had been the result of our helping out. It began at a rescue mission, a ministry that was considered by most people, even most Christians, as far out. Going to the impoverished peoples of Asia or Africa was one thing, but reaching out to sinners at home, beggars, tramps, bums, was beyond the call of duty. I had to admit that standing on the street corner playing the accordion and singing salvation songs was difficult for me. I dreaded the thought of one of our upbeat friends happening along. I knew I would be embarrassed and lose my bearings. I tried to imagine myself quoting the Bible verse, "I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ." It was at just such a service that a ragged man came up and asked for our prayers. His story was typical. He had lost his job, and his wife and child had left him because of his drinking. Our minister counseled him and invited him to our church. The next Sunday, to my surprise, this ragged, smelly, and unkempt man was at church, sitting in a front pew. During the introductions, he got up and gave a spirited account of his experience at the mission and gave all the credit for his reform to the lady who sang and played the accordion. I was aghast. The congregation was aghast. It was going too far to invite a dirty, ragged man to sit in our pews. How did we know that he was not a rapist or a murderer? The only one not aghast was the minister. In the weeks that followed, he spent time cleaning Tim up, outfitting him in presentable clothes and counseling him. Every Sunday, Tim was in his regular place, oblivious of the raised eyebrows, often with a letter for me expressing his gratitude and admiration. The situation was uncomfortable for me. I felt it was not quite proper. Not that there was any thought of physical attraction in my mind, but some in the congregation began suggesting otherwise. I felt that I should not encourage him, even perhaps reject him. But was that what we had gone to the mission for? I was relieved when Tim reconciled with his wife, and they, along with their child, began occupying a pew every Sunday. Soon they joined the church, and he became an usher. Because Tim was so desperately poor, the minister appealed to Corey to provide him with a few days of work. Corey was reluctant. He had been accommodating before, and it had seldom worked out. This type of laborer usually accomplished little, couldn't be relied on, and on one occasion was guilty of misrepresentation. It involved the rescue at Cannon Beach. When I had come home, Corey had asked a puzzling question. "What did you have to do with the rescue?" I was as puzzled as he seemed to be. He explained, "I got phone calls from witnesses telling me you were involved. But this morning the front page story in the Oregonian did not mention you. It stated that Lynn Pearson had rescued his brother and a young girl. Had I been in a normal state of mind, I surely would have recognized the name, but nothing clicked." Corey went on to explain that Lynn Pearson was one of his employees. When I went to the job, the guys were making over Lynn, proclaiming him a big hero. It clicked. I wrote a paycheck to that name every week. Suddenly I realized it was Lynn that I had first encountered on the shore, and it was his brother Dale that I had rescued. Lynn never spoke to me about it. Perhaps he was too embarrassed. Dale never darkened my doorstep, but I received a warm card from their mother, thanking me for saving her son and expressing sorrow for the misrepresentation. My ego was healed when the Seaside Signal printed a glowing account, and within a week, the Oregonian printed a retraction. Despite our uncertainties about Tim, Corey consented to a few days of work cleaning up the warehouse, but we weren't prepared for what came next. Upon completion of the work, Tim went to the Workmen's Compensation Office to apply for unemployment payments. This revealed the fact that Corey had not put him on the payroll. It was during this time that a whole new system had been put into effect, where the responsibility of reporting an employee's taxes to Uncle Sam had been transferred onto the backs of the employers, thus making the employer the big daddy to the employee. It was a system Corey still grappled with, and which, like all small employers, he resented. I go out and get the work, do the estimates, provide the equipment, supervise the job, and no matter what happens, even if our work has to be redone, I pay the wages and make out the reports. Corey held his head. Pretty soon workers won't even have to learn to read and write.